No excuse.
So it's 7 hours.
7 hours.
Yeah. Okay, shall I start? Hello to everyone who may see this this recording. So just a bit of background. Our main guest has not appeared yet, so I'll give you an introduction to the thematic, and hopefully Adam Arvidsson will show up. So my name is Michel Bouwens. I'm the founder of the P2P Foundation, and I've been invited here by Eric Owen Wright of the Sociology Department and Patrick Barrett of the Haven Center and other people to talk about peer production and particularly value, the conceptions of value in these new forms of production. So we organized 3 hangouts in this series. The first hangout was a community called Sensorica, which is an open scientific hardware community, which is actually using a open value accounting system that has been developed by Tiberius, who has a Romanian name, which I don't dare to pronounce, and Bob Hogan, who is a software programmer who has experience in supply chains and is now trying to adapt classic accounting to this more versatile open value accounting. The key issue, as you remember from that that hangout, is that we now have modes of production and value creation where it's not labor creating commodities, but many contributors creating a commons or a shared resource. Some of them may be paid, but many are not. And therefore, we need to find a new way, because what happens in these systems is that many people create collective value, but the danger is that some people then who have a connection with the market monopolize the exchange value. A typical example is the case of Huffington Post, where for 3 or more years, citizen journalists and other journalists were working for free to create a very successful citizen journal platform, but then it was sold, and Arianna Huffington, the owner, got, I believe it was $360 million, and not a cent flowed back to all the people who've been working for free. So a lot of peer production communities don't think this is fair and are trying to find solutions for this. And open value accounting is one of the ways in which they are looking for solutions. The second hangout was more research-oriented. So there is an EU funded research project called P2P Value. And we had Marco Berlinguer and Kartik Iyer, who are 2 researchers participating in this project. This is a very ambitious 3-year program that looked at 300 to 400 actual case studies of peer production communities and looked at their value practices. And what we learned yesterday was basically how to look at such measurement issue, whether actually it's a good idea or not to measure these things, because think about the issue of ecosystem services, right? One reasoning may be that ecosystems are not recognized precisely because they don't have the value that is recognized, and so you build these metrics. But the other view is, well, if you start doing that, then you actually commodify nature, and this is not what we want. So there is a huge discussion around whether these measurements are actually desirable at all. The problem that Marco and others were highlighting, however, is that this debate, at least in this context of open value, is already bypassed by the fact, because the fact is that corporate institutions are already measuring that value. They are developing all kinds of measurements. And so if we just say we don't need these measurements, we're not really stopping them. We're actually ensuring that they are controlled by corporate forces, which have their own agendas, right? So the whole issue was that the P2P Value Research Project analyzes how this kind of value could be measured, but then also wants to build alternative platforms in which these consensual value metrics could be embedded. So that would be actually part of the normal work when you're contributing to a platform. Okay, so So basically, if you follow my reasoning, we went from concrete to kind of a meta level of research, and now we go to the level of theory. But unfortunately, our guest is not there yet. So Adam Arvidsson, who we invited for this, is a professor at the University of Milan, who wrote a book called The Ethical Economy with Cambridge University Press. And so here is my understanding of his work. So hopefully Adam can correct me and eventually give more details. So here is the issue today. But if we look at the value that is recognized today, for example, the stock market, which is the main way of evaluating value, we see that the material value of a typical public company is only 20% of its recognized stock value. So the question then becomes, what is this other 4/5? And the answer is nobody really knows. It's called goodwill. It's kind of different. It's basically based on the expectation of the market on future value creation. And so the thesis of Adam Arvidsson is that this is the value of human cooperation, which is very imperfectly evaluated by the stock market, but is also not returning to the people who actually create that value. So we could take an example, maybe Nike shoes are a good example. I studied this years ago, maybe the figures are a bit different, but this is the essential idea. The production cost of the shoes is only $5 a pair, something like that, yet they are sold here at $150, $120. I'm not sure if that changed, but that's my ballpark estimate. And the part of this value that is going to the actual producers is very small, right? The value is captured by the networks, in this case Nike, which is not really a production company, but a network company which controls production through its own network and IP. So they are capturing all that extra value. Now, in peer production, you could argue this is even worse. So the good part of peer production is that it allows people to freely associate and offer their energy and time to a common resource, and that is rightly, I think, seen as a very positive development. But the negative side of it is that under conditions of capitalism, that's what we talked about just before we started, under conditions of capitalism, the exchange value that is created as a derivative of this common use value creation is almost exclusively captured by these new intermediaries, these platform owners, right? And the case of Facebook is kind of an extreme, since we can see that an empty platform would be valueless. So it relies on its users to actually create value. And the derivative value is our attention, which is then marketed and sold to the private sector. And what we can see is that in the case of Facebook, that none of this exchange value, or if there is, it must really be very, very marginal, is ever returned to the use value creator. So we have this kind of hyper neoliberalism, right? If we define neoliberalism as being characterized by no longer sharing the productivity gains with the workers, then using credit as a palliative, and then that breaks down in 2008. So we see that it's even worse in these new crowdsourcing and social media platforms, where even less of the value is returned to the people who actually create the value. So this is kind of what Adam called, and we wrote an article about this some years ago, called the value crisis. Right? The basic idea is that humanity is now technologically enabled to directly create more and more use value. Right? So we can see this if we compare YouTube to a classic media company. A classic media company pays workers and invests in production, actually makes movies, actually makes series. YouTube doesn't make any movies. Google doesn't produce any documents. Facebook doesn't produce any communication, any content itself, right? So we have this new layer of companies which are paradoxically, on the one hand, enabling these peer-to-peer relationships and this creation of shared resources, but on the other hand, are capturing that that exchange value. No, so here's the thesis that I'm not sure Adam would agree with, but this is the way I formulate it. So more and more value, use value, is directly created by user communities, creating shared resources. And this is really rising exponentially. And we can find figures that show this is actually the case. But the monetization of this is only rising linearly. So basically you have this increasing gap between a very fast-growing use value and only a marginally growing exchange value, right? So Facebook and Google may make a lot of money, but if you actually calculate it on the basis of their users, it's very little. It's like $3 or something for Facebook. So they're not making a huge amount of money on us, but by scaling up to 2 billion users, that is actually a substantial amount of income for them. And so this is basically a crisis. It's not just a crisis for productive users, because of course the idea is that the strong difference between producers and users is kind of blurring in peer production. You can produce code Linux, but it's because all the users are improving it all the time. They are co-producing it just as much as a coder would, right? So it creates precarity in the working class, and it's particularly in the knowledge working class. But it also creates a crisis of capital accumulation. In the sense that if you don't pay people and don't create wages in our system, then obviously there is no consumption power to buy those commodities that are created. And therefore you have a crisis, not just of precarity for the workers, but also of capital accumulation. Now there's various ways to think about this, and I will conclude and maybe then start a discussion if Adam is not showing up. Some of us, like me, would look more into post-capitalist solutions, right? Into solutions that bypass, or that at least create, within a dominant capitalist system, create post-capitalist logics. But another solution, I think this is Adam's solution. Adam does not believe that capitalism can be superseded, is to look at how the current system would then try to recognize that value and create income streams, because it's also its own self-interest. So that's what I understand from Adam's approach, is that he looks at how to recognize ethics, right? Because the notion of ethical economy, what it means in Adam's sense, is not like everybody becomes ethical in the sense of everybody's altruistic. What he means is that value today, because it's based on contribution, because it's based on passionate engagements, is actually based on ethical values, right? That production is no longer just an exchange of material value. The people who contribute to these communities are contributing out of a wide variety of ethical concerns. They want to improve or create something. And so the whole argument of the book is, how can we do this? How can we recognize like a diverse set of value streams and not just one? And how would it then be translated into benefit sharing and profit sharing arrangements that would resend, captured value to the people actually creating the value? I'm just going to end with one example of how some other people think about this, and just as a way that people also look for solutions. And this is called the fair shares model. And this is a model that actually comes out of solidarity economy. So actually from a kind of post-capitalist perspectives. The fair shares model is based on an ownership model that recognizes 4 value creators. The first is, they call it the founders' shares, right? So here's the idea. Sometimes a project, is based on years of work beforehand. So people actually, doing a lot of work together to create something. And that needs to be recognized. So recognition not just of classic entrepreneurship, but also of civic entrepreneurship, of the effort that goes into creating something new. The second type of shares are funders' shares. So people who provide money. These need not be capitalist funded, right?
So they're not investors,
They're investors. Well,
but now with an expectation of a return.
Different kinds of people who provide, capital for the project to scale, for example, right? The third one would be the workers. So the worker shares, all the people currently working to produce this particular value. But the fourth, and this is where I think it's interesting and necessary, is the user shares, right? Because as we move to these new models, where the line between production and use is blurring. I think about Facebook again as an extreme example. People who use Facebook are creating the value of Facebook. Even they are not working and they don't get wages. Because it's very easy. If they wouldn't be there, then the platform has no value, right? So it's I think also a normal ethical expectation that platforms that benefit from this use would find a way to reinvest in the community, in the commons. And here's the difficulty. Can you do this kind of benefit and profit sharing without recreating labor and commodity production, right? Because then you have what is called a crowding out effect, right? Which is famous for blood. So blood is a civic thing with people contributing free blood. The idea is, well, if we start paying people, we'll have even more blood. But no. What it does is that people that used to give blood for free are thinking, well, this is really a market, so I shouldn't be wasting my time giving things because it's a market. So they withdraw. And then other people who may need money but don't have good blood, for example, homeless people, this actually happens, right, would be motivated to give their blood and get paid for it. And so you would have less blood of less quality, and you would have crowded out the other motivations, the civic motivations, right? So same thing if you start paying people in Facebook by popularity, then this free flow of sharing because it's interesting, because it adds something, could be displaced by people creating uniquely because they know that sex and violence is something that works for generating more views, right? So you would actually, we have to find ways of recognizing that value and creating incomes that are not directly creating labor and commodities. Open value counting, which we discussed before, is one way to do this, right? Is to allow people to continue to contribute, not necessarily getting paid, they're doing for a variety of motivations, but with a social contract that says, if income is created through this value, then it will be fairly distributed post hoc, right, through some kind of mechanism that is related to the open value accounting social contract. Well, this is my introduction. I was hoping that Adam would show up.
I didn't get any emails from him saying, for example, I'm trying to log on and I can't.
Right.
He has not replied to any of my emails.
Okay.
Maybe he thinks it's tomorrow.
No, I emailed him last night, this morning.
Did he reply saying that he would be?
Yesterday, yes. Not this morning, but yesterday.
Yeah, I don't know. So I have a question. So this idea of people kind of creating and contributing just for the sort of the fun of it or the fulfillment of it, I think that is true in many of these cases. My husband is an open source software developer, but I also think that there are a lot of examples of these sort of what do you call them, metatarchal, where there is a direct. So, for example, Vine. The people who are very popular on Vine, who are they have a lot of followers, etc., they're making, $60, $80, $100, $200,000 a year through sponsorships, through product placement. The same in YouTube and Facebook, and people who, and so how does that sort of fit in to this ethics framework? Because these are people who are making a living at being celebrities on Vine. You know?
No, I should add just to what Laura said. Actually, for example, in Russia, people are making a lot of money through Facebook just through writing comments. But this is a very specific aspect of Russian corrupt politics. But for example, both the government and not the government, but pro administration structures and the liberal, so-called liberal opposition, new liberal opposition, they're paying bloggers. They're paying people just sometimes, if they have a lot of followers, they're just paying them to make a comment supporting, say, Putin or attacking Putin. And people are making their living on that. They're living on that. They're living on just writing comments. Okay, and to make things worse, by the way, many of these comments make no sense at all. Because, for example, if just an example, if somebody wrote a post, a piece on say criticizing the government or criticizing the opposition, then some people will just get money for just writing comments to the comment, saying this is nonsense or this is shit. It makes no sense, or just offending the author, and for that they will be paid. Actually, they will probably better paid for that than for the actual writing, because this is another interesting point. That then how many comments like that you can write a day? Like you're a fool. This is total nonsense. This article makes no sense. You can write hundreds of these comments. If you just get like $100 per comment, you can end up being maybe not $100, maybe even $5. But then you just produce quantity on this shit, and that says people are using their ways to kind of benefit from the neutral platforms. So in that sense, users are in that sense then neutral.
Well, this kind of points to something maybe a little more structural, which is that something like Facebook, I think it's similarly to television in the previous regime of accumulation, of hoardism, it's crucial for shaping the social environment in which commodity production and consumption takes place. In that way, it's of a somewhat different order than the actual commodity production, sales, and consumption. It has a more general function of shaping the environment, shaping taste, shaping attitude, and going as far as Boris points out, to actually shape the political forces that have other ways of shaping the environment, through law, through the use of administration and executive power and so on. So I find that the argument becomes fuzzy when it ignores this really crucial aspect of capitalist society, that things which are formally outside the market can actually be really powerfully instrumentalized for the market. I mean, they have been done so in each of the successive phases of capital accumulation regime. And we have a massive example of television going forward. It's not ignored. And I think Facebook is now Facebook and YouTube are now filling the gap of television has a little bit lost that function, because now television with 600 channels, and you can't really be sure that's going to shape opinion very coherently. On the other hand, Facebook, perfectly surveilled, perfectly shot through with sociological techniques for measurement. There's a lot of reasons why Facebook is extremely valuable for shaping public opinion and behavior.
Okay. I think first of all, it's really useful to make a distinction between social media and commons peer production, because Facebook is not commons peer production. So it's a platform where people can share their opinions and productions. Similar like if you think about Creative Commons, it's misnamed. Because Creative Commons does not create commons. It's a way for individual authors to determine the level of sharing that they would like to see with their own creation, right? So there's no commons being created there. On the other hand, if you think about Wikipedia or Linux, this is effectively people working on a common object. So there you have the creation of a commons. It doesn't mean that one is perfect, the other is not, but the dynamics are quite different. Facebook is not a commons. it's say it's a common platform, but it's not a commons. It's not a shared resource that is managed by its users. It doesn't fit the definition of what a commons is, right? And so another answer is that these shared resources are motivation agnostic, right? They are not based on altruistic behavior. They're not based on exclusively on anything. There's a lot of research has been done on the motivational aspects of free software and Wikipedia, and altruism is like 2 or 3% of the reasons why people actually do that. There's learning, there's reputation building, and we know that in Wikipedia some people get paid by intelligence agencies, by marketing companies, by PR to all co-shape the common resource. I think there it's a matter of degree, right? It's does it empirically destroy the commons logic? I don't think so. I don't think that these things actually destroy Wikipedia as a shared resource. That's a matter of evaluation.
That's not the question. I'm asking in the argumentation, I find that there's a slippage, not only in your work, but in many people's work, between really commons-based peer production strictly defined, and then the example of big platforms like Facebook. And I think this slippage is really damaging to the argumentation, because I think you're dealing with a different animal between the two things.
Well, when I write about this, I'm actually careful to make this different. But the thing is that they do have something in common as well. They're not just different. They also have this reliance on direct permissionless connection between individuals. And so this is the paradox. This is why I talk about network capitalism, because what you see in the social media is that the front end appears to be peer-to-peer and does allow levels of self-organization and sharing that were not possible before at scale. So it does do that, right? Whether it's looking for lost dogs or organizing mobilizations in Egypt, it does do that. But it does that in this context of a privately owned platform which has its own agenda. And there's many examples of how they nudge behavior. I heard this from a Facebook engineer, I hope it's true. So this is more or less a story. If a woman changes her picture, about 12 other women in her network will change the picture, and 300 males will, on average, be looking, that wouldn't be looking. And so they send these emails out, have you changed your pictures lately? Right? Now, maybe only 2% of the people actually answer this, but then they effectively have steered behavior, because they work with basically percentages, right? So the more interactions there are, the more the percentage of people that see a particular ad will grow, and the more the people who effectively click on it will grow. So by working on the general transactional numbers, even though they have no guarantee of a direct result, indirectly they will enlarge the pool of potential commercial transactions. So they continually, they're making Facebook addictive, right? For that reason, they're making it addictive, just like cigarettes are made addictive, right? They are studying very carefully how to do this, and there's hundreds of engineers studying, behavior, right, and seeing how they can nudge it. Now, this is true, but it's also true that it's a terrain of struggle, right? It doesn't. When 2 billion people are using Facebook, it's a social fact, and I think you can also use it as as an alternative person. You can use that as a way to reach people, and you're competing, with these other forces, right? But you're.
Can we return back to the issue of value? Because the initial discussion was more about measuring value, how adequate the value is, and that's what interested me quite a lot. But I have a very skeptical approach to this very debate. Well, actually, the debate goes on in Russia as well, by the way. You see, the problem here, first of all, in the more general kind of historical historical way. You see, I think it's quite natural for capitalism to kind of exploit the non-capitalist forms and modes of production and relations. So in that sense, capitalism exploited the traditional sector, it exploited some feudal relations and feudal states, and now it is sometimes exploiting early communist forms of relations and production. So in fact, what we see now is basically a case of a communist type of organization, post-industrial communist type of organization, being used and exploited by capitalism very much the same way as capitalism did with the traditional pre-capitalist modes of production. So that's one point from the point of view of political economy or historic economy, whatever, which I think exactly defines the kind of contradiction we are trying to resolve or explore right now. So here we come to another contradiction, and I think that capitalism is a system which is perfectly fit for industrial production. Capitalism generated modern industry. Capitalism is perfect. Capitalist relations are perfectly adequate for modern industry. And once you're going to post-industrial production, you're exactly provoking the need to create new relations. And these relations, I think, simply cannot be properly measured within the logic of capitalist production. That's exactly the truth. Which doesn't mean that they cannot be measured. What I'm saying is that they cannot be measured adequately. So you can establish certain systems. It's like with the nature. How can you measure? That's exactly where the trick is. You can establish certain systems of measurement which will probably even work. The question is whether they will be adequate. I think they will not be adequate, and there will be always something left outside, and that will be also, by the way, exactly the point of conflict and the point of additional exploitation of the resources. So the measurement is not adequate, or it cannot be adequate by definition. So what will be the potential answer? I think the answer is that we have to develop these structures as, well, let's be honest, as communist structures, or whatever. Which doesn't mean that they're not able of coexisting with capitalism, at least for the historic period. Quite possibly we'll have some kind of coexistence of these forms together. By the way, in the Soviet Union, we were taught that capitalism emerges within feudalism and then destroys feudalism from inside, while socialism, as we were taught in the Soviet Union, emerges from above. So you have first create socialist relations, and then, well, through political effort, and that's it. I think that was the self-justification of Stalin, right? Yeah. So, but in reality, I think communist relations will continue developing within capitalism. You just have to recognize the contradiction. And the last point is that the more networks are socialized, the better. We have to do everything to socialize these networks and to make them non-commercial, non-market, based on different types of relations and different types of measurement.
But isn't then, if the idea of the hope is that these communist types will truly.
Well, if you don't like the term communist,
yeah, I'm going to rephrase it that way.
You don't communist.
Yeah, no. Truly common space, exactly. Truly common-spaced forms of production are going to replace interstitially, as you alluded to, no traditional capitalist forms of production. Isn't the key issue then that if it is going to happen interstitially, that those common-based platforms have to ultimately directly compete with capitalist forms of production on the terms within a capitalist context? And doesn't the fact that more and more of those peer-to-peer network or platforms are being co-opted by capitalist actors and basically employed for their own purposes actually show and highlight that, truly common-spaced forms of production are failing and directly competing with capitalist platforms? Because they're just adopting them and actually Facebook is being leveraged for capitalist purposes, right? I mean, rather than like a communist, a truly common-spaced or open source Facebook springing up and out-competing Facebook. And I mean, just like, I'm thinking about these issues, like crowdfunding and in the crowdfunding context. Why is there no open source crowdfunding platform that actually leverage supposedly all the advantages of open source against, but not, it's not as big as lending. Yeah, but so why is it not scaling up and like replacing lending?
So
That's
The answer is very clear. It depends on the dominant relation in society. As long as the dominant relation in society and the power is with the capital, it's inevitable that communist elements will be exploited and used by the capital system. Just have to
a slightly different approach to that. It'd be interesting to hear, but usually.
Well, I was going to raise an issue very similar to Manuel's, which is to say, to what degree is this analogy to the relationship between capitalism and feudalism, and the relationship between this emerging common space and capitalism, wishful thinking? Is it perfectly analogous? Is there something structurally distinct about? I mean, to say that it's emerging within the interstices of a dominant mode of production is a very general statement, but can it get more specific about what's similar and what's different? And one of the questions that I keep thinking of is, where is there a tipping point? Where is there a structural threshold? Can that be identified where that point is reached, where it's no longer the dominant mode of production? What would need to happen in order to reach that point? Can we, but not a what your description of, what you were taught in the Soviet Union, I mean, it almost verbatim, I did say, to what you said the other day, in terms of the different understanding about how socialism and how this, I mean, they're very similar. The wording is quite similar. But what form does this revolution take? When specifically do we reach what is the structural characteristic of the threshold where the tipping point occurs, and then the momentum is all on the other side? And it does, I think, speak to Amanda's question about competition, because the role that morality plays, I think, is fairly small, in the sense that you could have a very moral capitalist, someone who wants good things for his workers and whatnot, but living in a capitalist society and facing competition of immoral capitalists, it doesn't matter. He will go out of existence as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, if he doesn't do what's needed to compete in a structurally defined set of relations, which morality doesn't play a role.
I would like to answer with it, right? So first, from the point of view of capitalism itself, these commons-based production methodologies are hyper-productive. If you're a single company using proprietary intellectual property, having to pay everyone, and you're competing with an ecosystem of several companies linked to several communities, linked to several commons, the tendency will be that this open ecosystem that is mixed will drive you out of this. This is happening in free software, it's happening in open design. So this is happening, right? What is not happening at scale is that alternative economics are using that hyperproductivity for their own benefit. This is what I'm working on. And I think it's not utopian. If you are a coder or a designer, it's class protocol. You're creating your shared resource, you need to make a living, right? This is why totally non-market is not possible, because if you think like that, you can't make a living, you have to work for capital. So at small scale, but actually not so small as we think, knowledge workers in the world are trying to solve these issues. They're trying to find ways basically to keep the surplus value within their own sphere of activity, right? So my solution as a transitional solution is that first of all, bottom up is create co-ops, worker co-ops, and other co-ops of software designers and through self-organization to link, so to have commons and cooperative production, some kind of hybrid synergy that, and then, and this is a bit more difficult, to convince the existing structures that we already have, because they are huge cooperative economies and solidarity economies and social economies in every country that are not using these models, right? And this is a paradox that the cooperative industry is using proprietary, enclosed intellectual property, and as the capitalists are opening up and sharing, and so they're capturing. So what I think is, and this is very similar to the fuel capitalist, is that paradoxically, the fact that fuel production helps capitalism is not as big a problem as we think it is, because that is actually what is creating resources for the growth of this alien system within capitalism, because it does have different characteristics. It's contributors producing commons, it's not labor producing commodities. So you have a post-socialist logic that is at present solving the issues of capitalism, but at the same time strengthening a different social logic that is alien to it. And the way I would see it, again, is very classical. It's like in the 18th century, you have, the feudal classes are losing power slowly but surely. The feudal owners who don't change to capitalist strategies are losing out, so they have to switch to the enclosures mode and capitalist property. And at the same time, the merchant class is growing, right? And then you have this period of the absolute kings, where the classes are a bit balanced, and we have a period where these kings are very powerful because they do the arbitrage.
So they play on the contradiction.
And they play on the contradiction. And I think we are, the way I see this related to the contradiction discussion we had, right? I believe we are at the cusp of a new contradiction wave that will.
This is actually my book where I
Okay, great.
describe
I have to read it. Yes. So that will integrate green and peer-to-peer under its control in its mode of operation to have a growth phase. At the same time, the ecological contradictions and resource contradictions are so big that I think in time, in 20, 25 years, we may have with that pressure, which will be reflected by political and social force. So it won't be just production. It will be things like Syriza and Podemos, which in their thinking have aligned themselves with these new social forces. That's what I would like to see happen.
Just ask a quick, so can you just clarify, so just to spell it out?
Yeah.
Like, just spell it out. So why is peer-to-peer production, not necessarily common peer-to-peer production, such a alien or different logic than it's happening? When you say that, you only mean like specifically comments?
It depends. So peer-to-peer is permissionless, communication and self-organization, right? So you can have that in markets, then you have a peer-to-peer marketplace, but this is a capitalism market logic. But if you base on open contributions, creating commons, this is not a market logic. Even though it's embedded in the market, it's a different relational grammar. It's driven by different value systems. Typically, a good example is 3D printing, right? You have the MakerBot, an open source 3D printer. Everybody contributes to it. It becomes the cheapest $600 3D printing machine, and it has a huge success. Then some of the creators look for venture capital. And immediately the venture capitalists say, oh, you can't share it. So they make MakerBot 2. But what happens? By enclosing MakerBot 2, they lose the support of the whole community. Right? So so in the short term, they will be able to capture and close, but at the price of losing the support of the network. So they didn't succeed in helping open source 3D printing at all. On the contrary, it's in full bloom right now. So a smart capitalist company like IBM doesn't do that. They say we support Linux and we listen to the community and we fund the Linux Foundation, and they do it in such a way that it's acceptable. And it's a form of social contract. It's like, you have to give agency to the open source developers. They are not so weak as you think, but they're selfish. They're not socialist. They're just looking at their own interest, and if they feel they can have good jobs, within that structure, they would accept it. Just as trade unions accepted this deal, right? But capitalism, in my view, is increasingly unable to do that. That's why you have in Spain and Italy, and Greece, you can see that most young people can see that capitalism is not providing them, with these benefits. And when they look at the solidarity economy and at what they know is enough, they look at going to ways.
No, if we were to follow up this idea that when we talk about a contractive way, what we're talking about. Okay, so what we're talking about is a period of major investment that lays down new infrastructures that then allow a significant amount of capitalist growth. Now, if we look at it closer, we find that this major investment in strictly capitalist infrastructures is preceded by public investments in a number of things. And if we just take the case of the post-World War II period, we're saying that first of all, security, war, there's huge investment in war, and then, and parallel to that actually, a huge investment in various forms of public infrastructure, universities and so on, but many forms of public infrastructure, housing and so on. So effectively you had a huge kind of public wave of investment followed by a partial privatization of that investment, because of course the corporations transformed during the war and then they were able to deploy themselves differently after the war in a strictly private way. That doesn't happen always following the same pattern. So the next one that happens in the 80s, 90s, it's not that different though. I mean, it starts out with Reagan, Star Wars, gives a big, this is a security investment which is actually realized in 1990 with the biggest coalition in the history of the planet, and which also serves to create a kind of give a tremendous push to all sorts of programming type skills, human capital, and then all that is redeployed privately in the 90s, And now we have a situation of we're in a major crisis. There are real problems for social reproduction. Looming on the horizon are major ecological problems, which are in fact for countries in the world like China, for Moscow, are present problems and not just future ones. I mean, people are choking and yes, it's really bad. So can you imagine, can you really imagine what kinds, because I think that contractive thing, it's not a genie in a bottle. It's you have to go kind of deeply into it to see how it works and have to understand this relation between top-down and state investments and the possibility of private investment. I'm very interested in that because I think that all these things will happen, but the question of what forms they take are very, very important.
Because otherwise I forget the very precise thing that I want to say. So I think there's a few things to say. First of all, is that companies like Google and Apple and Facebook already benefited tremendously from public investment, right? The internet.
Yeah, they're the money. So
even the search engine of Google was developed in university, etc., etc. So you could argue that they already benefited from this kind of stuff.
Yes, the last.
That's true. The other thing is that because of the particular historical configuration of neoliberalism, the state is particularly weak today. And if you look at the New Deal, I would argue that these kind of investments also require political transformation. And this is where we have a problem today that it didn't happen. So, like I was hoping Obama would be the new Roosevelt. I'm just totally wrong, right? But I thought, following his rhetoric, I thought he would do something, and he didn't. And so the result is, and I'm not a good historian, but you should probably know it better than me, but I heard that in 1874, when there was also systemic crisis, right? there were no reforms as well. So instead of having this clear, nice, growing, quantitative wave, it was a mess.
Yeah.
And I think
Repeated
this is
crises getting worse and worse.
this is, I think, where we are now. So this is, I think, where we are now. But paradoxically, I think that governments like Syriza and Podemos, right, they might actually be paradoxically the ways in which capitalism will reform itself, because these are not, Bolshevik organizations. Like Syriza merely wants to return to 2010. Before the big destruction of the welfare institution.
You should probably look for what the Chinese government does. And they have just throughout the crisis they've been major infrastructural spending, but they've done
$80
it.
billion in renewable energy.
Yeah, okay. So this is the one super game-changing form of infrastructure investment that they have actually done. And they do it also under the influence of their investors. That's very interesting. I mean, you can see that a progressive force from the last wave is actually making, similarly, Germany has also done those kinds of investments. And also those, also.
And he's a social democrat, right? He's an advisor to the prince, but he's motivated by social democratic values. I met him every time. He agrees with my stuff.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Because
Then he takes the hot angles out of it and makes it presentable.
So you can see there's already there is this kind of enabling state investment going on. It's minor compared to what the Chinese invested in railroads, what they invested in more coal-fired power plants, what they invested in the very dangerous urbanism that which is they're kind of riding the tiger. They have to make these urbanistic investments, but at the same time they don't know what the future of it is. And yet there is this aspect of it that you can see. So I think that it's no use to talk about the kind of congratulatory things if you don't start to really talk about it,
No, it also touches upon some debates which we have in our own institute in Moscow, because we have an economist, Vasily Kotashov, who is exactly trying to work out this problem of the net converted. And his guess is almost a bit like this, because as I said, this is that probably we are going to face the last converted cycle category. Let's around which
half cycle.
Whatever. Anyhow. So, but this is the kind of people which is quite interesting. So that's why I was kind of provoked when you said it's a bit like what we discussed. But you see, but there are some other aspects here, because first of all, don't forget what Vladimir is saying in his first presentation of this paper, that the change of cycles is characterized by the emergence of a cycle, a phase, is characterized by wars and revolutions. Don't forget this. And maybe we are really coming to the period of wars and revolutions, but in that sense, it is not happening automatically. In that sense, all these economic, social things, technological things, nothing will work, unfortunately, without politics. So, it's one question, and in that sense, actually, that is what makes me optimistic, even given the bleak picture we have around us now. Because I think the period of wars and revolutions has just begun. And speaking about Syriza and for them, the question is not what they want to do. The question is what they will have to do. And by the way, they have very interesting but very dangerous option which they're facing, because most probably they will have to be much more radical than they want, or they will retreat and be defeated. And so far, all the left governments always retreated and were defeated. It's a total standard pattern. You have a very good proposal, you start with it, then you face resistance, then you retreat for your initial good plan, because you can't break through the political obstacles, and then you retreat into a very bad plan B, which leads to your total defeat.
Yeah, Mitterrand in 1982.
It's happened again and again and again and again. Sick and tired of all that. But, I mean, I not follow these stories, but the stories of the development are not very good. Especially if things start changing in this field. What probably people in this country don't understand that Russia is heading towards a huge upheaval. Huge upheaval. We should be of the continent. And it's absolutely inevitable. It's absolutely inevitable. It's what people speak on the street. You go on the street, and most people in Saratov or whatever, people are speaking, how soon will everything collapse? How soon will we have to fight each other and so on? You know, that's what people discuss. Where can we go to Novorossiysk to get more guns there because there are already guns available? And then that's what.
So Gorbachev turns into Kerensky.
Putin. Putin. Forget about Putin. Putin is an invention of Western media. The Putin you're thinking about exists in the imagination of the Western media. There is a physical body for Putin, but it has nothing to do with the image you have in mind. So the problem here is that the next great expansion, also with infrastructure projects, with public investment, which has to combine both traditional infrastructure development with the new intellectual infrastructure development. They have to be interlinked and combined organically, integrated. Which is actually, by the way, another thing, or another point of our interview. That's the kind of research we're doing, how to integrate traditional kind of Kingston, Roosevelt, kind of infrastructure development with new high-tech intellectual infrastructure and so on. But all this will, unfortunately, I hate to say, but it will come through a series of catastrophes or ecological catastrophes. That's my guess.
And also, I mean, all the other ways have had this big. You need to have a big security investment before the private investment could take place. And as we see the world headed towards greater levels of conflict, I kind of think that would also happen. You know, it would always happen in the past. I don't really avoid that. I agree with it.
No, I think there's one difference, which is that this kind of traditional war that we had in World War I and II, they would be suicidal.
No, instead you have like
It's pretty suicidal right there.
a kind of continuous civil war, you know, kind of extensive terrorism points where you have open conflict, other points where that's spilling over and have like a different kind of security build-ups and the class differentiation within territory. This is what the Jews that are coming down to us. I mean, if you go into Latin America and Africa, you can really see, and Mexico. And as the Mexican meltdown of Mexican society spills into the United States, you can expect that we already live in a very security country. It's going to get more worse, more intense. And those sort of forms are, I mean, I just think they're going to be real, you know. I mean, they're projecting into the future how these things can develop. Does take some courage. Some intellectual and even moral courage in a way.
So I have, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm optimistic about it, but if you look at the sociology of Syriza and Podemos, it's completely different from the social democratic parties, right? These are not bureaucrats who have all history of adaptation and cultural adaptation. These are different. These are young people like us who are thrust young.
Your own description of them is that they're very amorphous. It's hard to identify what.
But maybe it's good that they are amorphous at this stage.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, we don't know what.
I think about Chavez when he came to power. He wasn't a radical at all. They were really forced. Like if they wanted to survive, they had to take control of the oil, and they had to do all these things because the other side was so ruthless. Right? I mean, if you see how ruthless the EU is with Syriza, it's if they give in, they're dead. They will be wiped out, electorally in the next election, and
And these are not politicians yet. They are still
And
people who
they
are
are
working in the
public
solidarity
opinion
economy,
behind.
and they were on Syntagma Square. They were. These are the kind of people in Syria. They're not just. They're not politicians as we know them. Right?
And there's broad public opinion not.
70%.
So is there any journalism for the public that educated?
Yes.
How should journalists is that the public opinion is very much that these are lazy people,
Yes.
and it's their own fault, and they can't get. I mean, it's like a
And they work.
way
They work 6 hours more a week.
they've
but that's a
moralized
detail,
the debt, right?
Yeah.
The debt's becoming like a moral issue.
Yeah.
It's like a moral issue for the
But you
newspaper.
know what is kind of funny is that Russians thought the same about Greeks, exactly like Germans. It was, as long before Syriza, it was in Rush part of the thing, it was the lazy Greeks argument was totally absorbed by Russian public opinion. But now when Russia is at odds with the EU, all of a sudden the Greeks became heroes, even with the conservative segments of Russian public opinion. Because it's not about lazy Greeks, but it's about brave Greeks who are ready to confront. Yeah. So things change very, very fast.
Well, I think, if we want to imagine a future for peer-to-peer production on, say, a 20-year scale, counting the period of turbulence that we seem to be entering now, I wonder if, and this became, a common currency and a big support of the last step, this expansion. It cost, now it's down to $500, it costs $1,000 expansion. I think these toolkits of decentralized manufacturing and also, of course, decentralized energy, solar panels, could be a support comparable to that one, because they're creating a global product
Don't
that
forget,
will respond to the need,
especially
especially
at the urban level, because this is what's happening. Right? Nation states is very complicated to change and requires huge struggles. But Barcelona, it has the FAB city plan to relocalize production 50% by 2050.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Half industrial and half agricultural production. Barcelona regulation will come. Already 30 projects in a year, and 100 in the pipeline. So I think at the local level, there's,
Well, that has to be approaching some serious threshold.
well, for people like me, I'm super
That's-
excited by Bologna and by I've been to Mantova and like in Italy. Like you read the newspapers, you would think nothing is happening there. It's Berlusconi and Renzi, but you look at the local level, and it's an amazing mobilization of people.
But what that's, if you can actually make it local, what that says is that you create your own inner economy, internal economy.
Yes.
You remove yourself from dependence on relations external to it, so that you can create an island in a sense.
No, but at some point there will be confrontation, but still there are certain perspectives. There is a certain way you can go without hitting the limits.
But there's a huge
Up
wave
to a
of,
point.
there's a
Then,
huge
of
wave
course,
of vehicle localization right now. The amount of urban agriculture in the US has gone up with 48% in 2 years. It's invisible, but it's happening.
But
Even in Madison, you will be surprised how many people are looking at renewable energy and rethinking the food supply chain. And this is something I want to say: it's not always in competition with capitalism. Right? People who do, for example, group purchasing. There are 80 groups just in Brussels. Right? So it's not 1 million people, but it's maybe 10,000 people, right? But these people, they're not competing with capitalism.
No. And
They're not marketing their goods to compete with the capitalist food company. They are people who are taking into their own hands the use value production of food because they don't want to be dependent on that system, right?
But this is where the politics is really relevant, because it's not just that, as you were characterizing it earlier, the capitalists will sort of capitalize upon the growth of the commons, but there are elements that are fighting tooth and nail to kill this kind of initiative. I mean, the kind of government we have currently in the state of Wisconsin is trying to kill any public space there is. And I mean, we've also moved, there's an initiative, and a successful one, to move away from home rule, that deny people the capacity to determine at the local level what kinds of policies their localities will pursue. And that's true in plenty of other places. I mean, in Michigan, this is true. Where they,
This is
I mean,
the
there's a
most
current
reactionary
initiative on the part of this
thing.
government to take away the public schools in Milwaukee from the city of Milwaukee. So there's
I think the
they're
US
not going to go quietly into the night. They're
No,
going
but
to
there's
fight.
there's different strategies, right? The US strategy and, for example, the Spanish strategy, the Partido Popular is anti-commons, anti-P2P, anti-renewable energy, anti-crowdfunding. But the Dutch and the UK is much more clever, right? They are using big society, in the case of the UK, and it's called participation society in the Netherlands, to build down the welfare state. So there are different strategies. It's not always,
No, I'm not. I'm
you
just,
know, because I think this is the issue. I think, why is China, for example, can do things? Maybe I'm a bit naive in this, but I think in China, despite all the issues, there's still a cadre of people who can say this is good for our society in 20 years time. Right? Like in China, you see speculation in the city. The government actually tells the banks stop lending, and the whole economy collapses, and then the house becomes more affordable. It happened a few times, right? In the US, you can't do that. You can do the high-speed train. You can send out a directive that sugar is bad for you because the American Sugar Association intervenes. So I think the US is a particular difficult situation because it's the most reactionary elements, the most short-sighted ones who want to extract and predatory,
crony capital.
and they don't think about what's happening in about 10 years, right? But there are other elements of the ruling class that are probably saying, we need to do something about it, right? And I'm thinking of Roosevelt. This is an anecdote that I heard recently. So when the unions came to visit him, and they were asking for stuff, he said, "Well, make me do it."
Right. That's an old
Yeah, it's
story.
okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
make me do it, right? And so this is the issue today: is that the social movements are particularly weak.
There's another story, a similar story about Johnson and King. I'm not going to do the right thing. You have to make me.
But in terms of, if you think back on the change in the way that international commerce is articulated and is really an industrial production due to the creation of
Yeah, so
the milk tables, and you could not coordinate a global production chains without fiber optic cables. So that affordance
Laura works with something.
was partially desired and partially created unwanted consequences. But it did create a system that's very, very different from the Horus system. Well, and that system was accompanied by a kind of sort of flexible management coordinated through arm's length market relations. Which is not what you're talking about when you talk about peer-to-peer. You're talking about local communities more or less gaining relative autonomy over common space production. It's really interesting to imagine that being in tandem with new global products. Because the global products is not going to go away. With capitalism, if any sort of expansion occurs, I don't think it's going to be a capitalist or communist thing. I think there'll be an expansion of these characters that depend on which products are going to become the vectors of an expansion and what organizational forms articulate the use and the productivity of those products. We can see how it happened with cables and PCs in the recent past, but we need tremendous imagination to see how it might happen and to shape that might into a will for the future, and I think that's really the thrust of the work that you're doing. I think it would be really interesting to go with a little more kind of a little more vigorous projection into the future,
Well, I'm counting on you, Brian.
I
I think we're going to finish
Do you
the
have any concluding
session.
words,
No,
just so
I
we can
don't.
finish the?
Unless somebody wants to conclude.
I think it was an exciting discussion.
Yeah.
That's a good conclusion.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you so much, future watchers.
And thanks to Adam.
Adam. Yeah.